everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Rose Tinted Ceilings podcast. Today we have a very special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Shivani. I'm the host and producer of Survivor Talks podcast.
You want to talk a little bit about Survivor Talks? Like, just what is it? Give us your little elevator pitch.
Yeah, so Survivor Talks came from a place like personal experiences and the experiences of other people in our community who have experienced like violence in their life, specifically like sexualized violence or gender-based violence. So I realized a few years ago when I first launched it that there was really no platform on people who are speaking about like these really important topics and how mental health relates to it and trauma, the psychological parts of it. So I decided to launch this podcast. And dive more into social justice work. So it's been really amazing. I'm just finishing up wrapping season 2, and season 3 should be launching in the new year.
That is amazing that you saw the gap in your community and you went straight for it. You took that initiative to make it happen.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that must have been difficult to do given that there's not a lot of platforms for our voices. So I'm curious what kind of challenges that you ran into initially when you started your podcast.
It was definitely because like gender-based violence is such a triggering topic. It was definitely difficult to have people come on board and speak about like not even just personal experiences, but just about like violence in general, considering how much of a taboo and stigmatized topic it is. So we have people like on the podcast previously who come from different racial backgrounds, different ethnicities, and they've told me like, yeah, it's not normalized. Like usually the shame is on predators and abusers in our community rather than like the shame is usually on survivors in our community rather than, the other way around, placing the shame, blame, and guilt on like predators and abusers in our community. So it was really difficult to get people on board to speak about that. There's a lot of like lack of education, lack of knowledge, and I blame that on our education system because it's not that great. And even just, what's spread in our community through like our parents and like elders and seniors and even just like through friends and like how much rape culture just enabled.
For sure. You talked a little bit about how because of the stigma, it was a little hard for you to find guests. Like, how did you eventually overcome that? Like, how do you find the people who are willing to come on and talk and educate others now?
Yeah, so I did start off with like just personal friends who have like supported me through like my own experiences. And in turn, like I just wanted to also give them a platform and remind them like, like this is going to be a safe space. Like we know each other on a personal basis, I'm not going to judge you by any means. So it comes down to that and also just really focusing on the fact and reminding people who have experienced violence in their life that they are in control of their own experiences and like me and no one else is going to be coming in between like or create like judgment or like overspeak for them. Like they are going to be in the driver's seat of their own narrative, and I think it's really important to spread that message.
Hmm. I find it really intriguing that you mentioned that a lot of it's to blame on a lack of education. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more to that and where the lack is and how we can create that safe space even with this lack.
Yeah, so with the lack of education that we have, it usually comes like I remember being in high school and there wasn't a lot of education on consent, and it was mostly just like, oh, this is how you put on a condom, and they called it a day, right? There was no like healthy relationships. There was no talks about abortion, like how to have safe abortion or even abortion pills. There wasn't talks about like how to identify red flags in relationships, what is toxic, what is healthy. So it does come down to that. I am working on a consent education curriculum right now, and it is a little tough because I want to include anything and everything possible. And like there is a survey that I created, and hopefully like there are previous and current high school students that are able to fill it out just so it helps my work better and able to like identify the gaps and like what can be included in the consent education curriculum that I originally missed out on.
That's so cool. Like, how do you plan on like distributing this? Like, how are you planning on getting this information out to people?
Yeah, so with the survey, I'm doing it through Instagram, but I'm hoping like networking can also help a lot, like just getting the word out to people and spreading the word. And then once it's finalized, like I plan on doing it through like I live in Surrey, so I want to start off with Surrey. And I've heard that contacting like the Surrey School District is really, really difficult. There's a lot of barriers and obstacles and a lot of racism and discrimination that you face. So that will be tough. But once that goes through, hopefully with the help of like the Minister of Education and other teachers who are able to support the project, it could hopefully become like a nationwide thing. Yeah.
That's awesome. Like, how did you even find out about this process where you like can reach out to the Surrey School Board? Like, I had no idea you could do that. Like, do you have any like anyone like guiding you, anyone kind of like walking you through the process?
Yeah, so I think it was about 2 years ago I brought it up with like my one of my friends, and he was telling me like, you know what, um, I see a lot of work that other student-led groups do, but there's no one that's really like who has done that after graduation. So I reached out to one of my friends who's really well known in the community, does a lot of amazing community work, and he was telling me like, okay, this is who you should contact. They know a tons of information. They know all the process of how to get it through. So, he connected me with a bunch of people, and they really supported the project as well.
Sounds like there were a lot of barriers along the way of your project as you continue to evolve it and keep doing great things. So I'm wondering, at some point where you might have felt like this is getting really difficult, these barriers almost seem too high, what was it that uplifted you and helped you keep going with your project?
Honestly, you just have to remind yourself to like keep on going. Like I know like there are people who have recently graduated and are still like in high school who have contacted me about like their own like personal experiences with violence and like how schools like high schools handle it, and it just like disappoints me a lot. It can be taxing because of like personal experiences, and like when people when there are other survivors who are coming to you and telling you about their own personal experiences, they can like kind of trigger you in a way. So it's really important to just like reset, like take a step back, decompress, and just come back at it again. um yeah, I'm not all for like doing work to the point where it exhausts you mentally. I'm all about like, taking care of yourself, practicing self-care by whatever means is best for you. So for me that just looked like, just resetting and restarting from point one again, and then just building back from there.
Sure. That is awesome. I'm really curious about like with Survivor Talks, what's your plan for that? Because you mentioned it started like up as a podcast, but now you've also got a curriculum going. Like, what are your future plans with Survivor Talks?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of things I've been doing with the podcast, like just beyond it being a podcast. So I actually just released a documentary about a few months ago on behalf of Survivor Talks, and it focuses on the stories of like six individuals who have experienced violence in their life. And just talks about like their healing journey, their trauma. There are people from different backgrounds, so we get like the intersectional part of it. It's very inclusive. Um, and it just focuses a lot on like racialized people's experiences with violence. And then for the future, I've been wanting to host a lot of events as well. So one of them has to do with like how toxic masculinity and the patriarchy impact male survivors and prevents them from speaking out, because there is a stigma with male survivors. Has a lot to do with gender roles and patriarchy and toxic masculinity. So there's one, and I want to specifically focus it on South Asian male survivors. And the other project I am working on is how intersectionality intersects with like people who have experienced caste oppression and discrimination, and how that ties into violence against women as well. In India, it is a topic where like women from lower castes are subjected more to gender-based violence, but their stories are not often met in mainstream media. So that's just another event, and just inviting people who identify from a low caste and speak about their own experiences too.
That's really, thank you so much for sharing that. Because like
Yeah.
a lot of these subjects, again, like there's not a lot of education about this. So I think like the whole event thing is a really good idea just to even make people aware of this. Now
Yeah.
I'm wondering, you brought up how, again, in a lot of like Asian backgrounds, these are big issues. You also mentioned how you're based in Surrey, so I'm like, so are we. So are this podcast. We're like very close there. So I'm wondering, are you seeing? Because Canada almost likes to portray itself as super inclusive and super welcoming, right? Like, are you seeing th- is that right? Like, are we doing good to like be advocates about violence? Like, how is Canada, especially kind of this lower mainland, treating almost like survivors? Like, how are we doing with that?
Um, I think we have a lot to do. Like, honestly, I know there's been some women organizations that have received funding to open up and use sexual assault centers. I know that in the past we have received more funding from the government for, to support survivors, but I think that we can do so much more. I definitely think we need more permanent shelters for people who experience violence just because like temporary ones are way too chaotic. And it's just like a band-aid solution, right? Like you get specifically with women and children when they leave an abusive household, they are like there's a whole system that they navigate, right? And even just like with counseling support, we have a very long wait list to get free counseling support services for people who have experienced gender-based violence. And I know like the wait can be up to like 2 years long. And then there's something called the Crime Victim Assistance Program, where if you are eligible for it, you get about 45 to 50 free sessions. But even that, you have to provide all the evidence that you possibly can and just tell your story on a piece of paper. And these people, I don't know who they are. I don't know if they're social workers or if they're counselors or anyone who just like social justice work, but they are basically just really like picking holes in your story and trying to evaluate whether it's true or false. And if it's like, if they feel like your story is not enough for them, they will deny you. If they feel like it's true, okay, great. Um, then there's another process you have to go through to get accepted for free counseling. Um, yeah, it's just a very, very tiring, long journey. I think that we definitely need more counseling support. I think we definitely need more sexual assault centers that are inclusive and intersectional, like take on an intersectional practice. I think we definitely need more shelters and more housing. Our BC housing system is corrupt in all states possible. And it's not even just like unhoused people who have been subjected to experiencing like sexualized violence. It's also people who are housed and they experience abusive scenarios in their own household. So I think this country definitely can do better. And then on top of that, we are looking at we're looking at international students who come here and are also exploited a lot. There's not a lot of resources for smaller college communities where a lot of people think that, you know, violence doesn't happen on smaller college communities, but it does. There's not a lot of research on that. There's not a lot of stories coming out of it, but it does exist. I find that the top universities they often do have more funding and more resources, but I think definitely, you know, that can definitely be extended to all smaller and larger college campuses.
Hmm.
For sure. I love how you touch on intersectionalism a lot, because I think that is something that people
Yeah.
tend to like overlook when talking about survivors and assisting survivors. So I'm just curious, from your point of view, like what are some of those like intersectional practices you mentioned that we should be implementing? Like what are some ways we can view helping survivors in like an intersectionalist lens?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand like every survivor is different and every survivor comes from different backgrounds. For me, for example, okay, like I'm a survivor of sexual violence. I talk about that a lot. I'm not ashamed to share that. And then on top of that, I'm also a bisexual woman. So these two intersect with each other because there are statistics out there that prove that, women who identify as LGBTQ are more um, highly to experience violence in their lifetime. On top of that, I'm also a racialized woman. So that just, really intersects with each other as well because I'm a racialized woman. I do experience more violence than someone who's not racialized and marginalized in our community. Um, and then to go into that a bit more, there's just like a healing journey that you experience. I have like mental health issues as well. So it's just kind of like gets layered on top of one another. And I don't think that there is enough research for people, like for professionals in our field to understand like how we can really address the situation. Um, but like it's just really important to to go into when we're talking about violence. I think it's just really important to understand like, okay, here's someone who comes from many different backgrounds. Let's see how each experiences like intersect with one another and how we can deal with that in a healthy and safe way. And I think like this culturally appropriate based therapy is really helpful.
I think that's so amazing that you're spreading awareness on a plethora of different issues, rather than just, I guess, a one-sided perspective that we see a lot in media, and I really love that. And I think for the young girls watching, it would be great if they had some piece of advice for how they can start to open up to this awareness and how they can start being a sponge and soaking in this education, because I know for a lot of young girls, it can be difficult to initially open up ourselves to all this information.
Yeah, so I guess I can tag this in with my own experiences as well. Like being when I was younger, like I just was like this quiet little kid, didn't really speak a lot. And I remember just like lacking a lot of confidence. So I think like just start off with your confidence, like just know like okay, you need to own your truth. And it can be really difficult for people like who choose not to believe you, whether it's friends or family. But like as long as you just keep your truth warm and you know what happened to you, you can't let that like affect you. And it's really difficult to say. I think it's really appropriate. I think it's really good to surround yourself with people who are supporting you, who are believing you in experiences, and just show you like a lot of love and light in your life and guiding you as well. I think for a lot of young girls, like there's a lot of like stigma and a lot of like they're kind of in the unknown a lot of, and again this kind of ties into like a lack of education. um so just like really knowing like your self-worth is important, like practicing your self-care in like whatever ways is possible, and just like again like just own your truth. Like you need to be unapologetically yourself.
Thank you so much for that and for everything you said. I know a lot of these subtopics can be really vulnerable, so I'm glad you're here spreading awareness, coming on here to spread awareness too. And just to wrap us up, is there any last thing you want to say about survivor talks or any of your other projects, like anything to shout out?
No, but if you have the chance to listen to it, like it is on my Instagram bio, season two, episode 9 is going to be released tomorrow. So hopefully people get a chance to listen to that. Season 2 is a little bit different because it does focus on male experiences, and I hope like people go in with a really open mind, like just be really open minded about it, just because there is a lot of stigma surrounding male experiences. So I hope that it does educate people. But other than that, just stay tuned, support the project, support like people who are doing really good community work.
Thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing. Love
For
it.
sure.